for years now, I've been using the term, concussion in my work almost daily as the statewide training coordinator at the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina. And I'm really, dedicated to teaching people about the signs, symptoms, and what recovery looks like from a mild traumatic brain injury, or concussion is what it's called. I've never really come closer to that awareness than earlier this year in May. I became so sick and dehydrated, and resulted in extreme dizziness that I ran into a door frame, smacked my head on the hard floor late at night, early in the morning hours. And, the next month and even longer than that has been a really wild roller coaster of symptoms. And, I didn't really actually think anything was wrong at first. I stayed in bed the next day because I was recovering really from the sickness that I had. But, I got up the next morning, I felt fine. I drove into work. I had a webinar that I was doing later that day. So I had to kind of just push through it, but it really didn't take long for, me, when I was starting on my computer screen to check through emails, I started just feeling this fuzziness behind my eyes. They felt so strained, and it felt so fatigued so quickly. My head started to hurt just all throughout my whole head. So I, got through the webinar, pushed through, and then, went home early because I was like, I need to get home. I was hoping maybe it was just leftover sickness symptoms. Maybe I was just dehydrated. I need more water. But I was still, obviously, in the nature of what I do, I was worried that it could have been more than that, right? I was really concerned that, maybe, I started to think back to the fall. I was like, did I hit my head? Obviously I knew I hit my head, but was it enough to cause a concussion? And I did have I did fell hard enough that my earring, broke off. And I did, throw up soon after. Of course, I thought it was related to the sickness, but, now I'm thinking well, I'm having kind of a hard time remembering the events right before and right after. So all of these things are little tiny red flags in my brain of what I tell people. These are all kind of big signs of a potential concussion. By the end of that night, I was already experiencing kind of that fuzziness and the headaches. But by the end of that night, it was so much pain. All the lights and noises bothered me. And, again, at the time, my concussion symptoms checklist is just going check, 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 check. So I started then. I was like, okay, well, let me feel around. Maybe there's some sort of, maybe I can feel a bump or, some sort of pain. And sure enough, I hit one point and there was just a shooting pain of, obviously some sort of bruise where I had hit my head hard enough. It was right in between kind of my frontal and my temporal lobe. For all you science lobe nerds out there, but kind of right here. So, I was faced with a decision to make, and kind of okay, well, now I've got to put all of my knowledge and my research was about to be put to the test in real life. Plus all the advice that I had given to others throughout the years about concussion, I really needed to be more than just talk. It was time to walk the walk. And so I wanted to share just a few things of what I learned throughout this concussion process. Some of the things that just felt like it was normal during my concussion, even though it was anything but. Though I'm not a medical professional or doctor, and this is not individualized advice, just my personal experience, I'm hoping it can help some of you out there that are experiencing these concussion symptoms and maybe just trying to push through. But really, the biggest advice I can do is, listen to your body and take those signs and symptoms seriously. I'm about 4 or 5 months away from that initial incident. I've had about, I had about a month of really serious symptoms that I couldn't kind of get away from. And then I finally started to feel like myself again. But I still find myself, if I, overexert myself or do a lot of like, when I say cognitive processes, like thinking, like really like demanding thought processes, or like a lot of computer work where I'm like really focused for a long period of time. So, last night that happened. I got overstimulated. And it was, I'm still dealing with the after effects of that. And so that kind of happened. And I was like, it's Falls Awareness Week. I need to get out there and, potentially help some other people based on my experience. So I have a few tips that I wanted to share with you guys. First of all, I wanted to say, rest at the start of any sort of injury or traumatic brain injury or concussion is so important. It's so key. Research indicates that the most rest should be taken within the first like 24 to 48 hours after a concussion. Luckily, I was able to rest like a full day the first day, even though I didn't really suspect the concussion. If I had known what I had known now, I definitely wouldn't have tried to go to work the next day and driven and did all these, really high thought processes of trying to coordinate, technical challenges of a webinar and things like that. But, it was really challenging to assess how I felt because my concussion presented like really perfectly fine in the morning because I had so much rest, no symptoms whatsoever. So I was like, oh, I can take on the day. It must have just been a fluke. But as the day went on and I engaged in more activities, and definitely whenever I had dealt with screens, more stimulation, more just lights, movement, anything, the more the symptoms would come on and the more brutal they would be. Another tip that I wanted to give you guys was, alternate activity and rest. It's kind of like a balancing act for how you feel. You're basically taking this time to assess, again, listening to your body. You're kind of expanding your tolerance for stress and activities and kind of like building upon what you already have. But it's really important that you don't take it too far. Though, previous research on concussion suggested resting as long as you can, sometimes for like weeks on end of doing nothing. More recent data suggests that activity after a concussion can actually lead to improved results faster. However, this is a really fine line and fine balance because it's really important not to push yourself too fast. Your brain is basically trying to recharge, reset, and kind of balance its normal activities. So if you go too fast, too quickly, it's just really not going to, you're only going to do more damage to yourself, and it's going to take longer for you to recover instead of the opposite. So, basically from my experience in the first few days, I basically worked on the rule of thumb that like every 30 minutes of activity, basically anything that required like cognitive demand, thought processes. I did try and like keep working, but I would break it into kind of like 30-minute intervals. And then after that, I basically take about an hour of rest. As soon as I experienced any sort of symptoms, headaches, that fuzziness, I stopped what I was doing. I think a lot of people like will be like, oh, well, like I'll just push through, but it's only going to hurt you later on, at least in my personal experience. I would have to put on a sleep mask to cover up my eyes, even reduce the light, even at night. It still wasn't dark enough. I needed to have the sleep eye mask on. I would lay in bed with no noise whatsoever. Later in recovery, I would just play like instrumental music, but like even like listening to like words or anything like that was just too much, like watching TV or anything. And I just kind of like went back and forth like that, kind of just like paying attention to what my body is telling me, stopping when I needed to. And really the first like few days, I could hardly get through 2 hours without without pain or symptoms of feeling fuzzy or foggy. Within the next 2 weeks of kind of doing that, kind of like slowly upping the amount of time that I was doing activity, the time between the symptoms would grow. So I wasn't like immediately better, but I would be able to last for like 2 hours, then 3 hours, then 4 hours, and then I'd need to break. So it's not like an instantly kind of like, at least for me, like get better really quickly, but I was feeling better for longer. And I was able to function more normally. And so I was trying to, test myself by going out more and doing the normal things that I would do, including, exercise and other types of things. That being said, I was doing everything, while I was increasing my activity to reduce the extra stimulation. Stimulation is basically anything that you see, that you hear, anything that your brain is processing that sometimes we just put on the back burner. We don't realize that your brain is trying to process all that information. My eyes were very much the most affected after my concussion. It felt as if like there was like a buzzing behind my eyes, like bees or something. It's so strange. And I know that in the very beginning of the concussion, it felt like my eyes were cross-eyed, like kind of like a little bit. And then like it would take so much effort for me to like focus them on something. And so it was just so fatiguing. I'm getting flashbacks right now. It's like, it's stressing me out. But I was training to be able to see clearly, and it was really just exhausting. So that meant that any sort of screen time, I'm talking phones, TVs, computers, and it was probably taking about like 5 times the normal amount of energy. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of my day is spent phones, TVs, computers, some sort of screen time. This was a total shift in my normal activity. It was really difficult. Like a lot of people, my morning, I would start with the daily Wordle. I would watch TikToks. And after that, most of my day was spent, working on the computer, watching, TV shows and movies at night, having music on in the background or listening to podcasts. Like I'm the type of person that like, I didn't really like silence or like that nothing was going on. I almost like overstimulation. So this was a whole different shift because now I had to be okay with silence and I had to be okay with doing nothing. And it was awful. I'm not going to lie, but eventually as I took the time to be okay with silence, again, I was able to kind of elevate out to, the music without words, and then potentially to music with words. And then, I eventually switched to audiobooks when I could tolerate that. Because, I couldn't deal with screens. So I would maybe like listen to a TV show, but mainly at that time I was, sitting outside trying to just like watch nature as my TV, reducing the screen times. I would be turned away from the TV if like me and my partner were like watching movies. We would pick something that like I've seen like many times. And so I would just be able to like listen to it. And yeah, the audiobooks were a godsend when, I couldn't do, any sort of TVs. Another strategy that I definitely want to impose to you guys is, keep an eye on your mental health and your state of mind. It can be really difficult. Again, like I said, stuck in silence. You're kind of like bombarded by just your thoughts. And then, really you're in this significant amount of pain. And so there were definitely days where I felt like really unmotivated. I just didn't want to move from the bed. I didn't know. I was really scared. I'd heard so many stories of people that either don't get better or, they have debilitating or lasting concussions. So at times I really felt hopeless. I was like, is this going to last forever? Like, how am I going to get through this? Like, it felt all consuming. And it's really hard when like the people around you don't really understand. Like you could be having this like whole conversation with yourself and like they're just like going about their day. The research says that most with mild concussions are actually more likely to experience psychological symptoms. And when I say psychological symptoms, I'm talking about, the development of like the particular symptoms like related to anxiety or depression, or other types of things. So like significant worry or significant sadness for an extended period of time. And because of these factors, it's more likely to delay overall recovery. So it's really a key that you acknowledge your own mental health and where you're at, because to everyone else you look perfectly normal. I was able to critically kind of like investigate these symptoms almost like a detective, and see them as related to concussion because of the work that I do. And I was able to adjust my activity accordingly and advocate for the changes that I needed. I would say, like, this is what happens. This is why I need to. It's because of my concussion. But, throughout this experience, I couldn't help but think about that person that maybe hit their head and just felt off or didn't different and not sure why, and wasn't able to advocate or just push through. So that really kind of motivates me to help other people throughout this experience. It also leads me to kind of like my next tip. Try to put yourself and your health first, particularly at this time. It's okay to be a bit selfish. Ignore how it might look for other people, and advocate for what you need. I rested and scaled my activity, like I said, for basically an entire month, but I knew I needed to start returning to regular activity if I was going to get better. If you just stay at one level, you're not going to push your tolerance and recover as fast. So that meant whenever I went outside to go shopping or go to a doctor's appointment, I was wearing sunglasses and hats indoors. I was definitely giving off the creepy serial killer vibes, especially because at that time, I was wearing a mask as well. So you just could not see anything. I was, it basically wearing a hat helps reduce your visual field so that you're not taking in as much. And it also reduces the glare from overhead lights and helps you focus your sight. So I knew I wanted to wear that. When I could, I tried to opt for natural lighting and kept lights really dimmed low. When I went to the doctor's office, they actually dimmed the lights for me. So, you can always ask about that. I tried to avoid screen time. So, a lot of times when we have dinner, we're just sitting and watching TV. So instead we did go out to a restaurant. Don't know if that was the smartest move, but when we walked inside, oh my gosh, everything felt like it was shouting at me as if it was a Mexican restaurant, which nothing against Mexican restaurants, but it was very loud music, a lot of things going on. It had a lot of different colors and stuff like that. Lovely restaurant, love it. But I was like, okay, I know that I'm not going to be able to eat inside. This was way too much. So I made sure to request that we sit outside, kind of away from the loudspeakers, to help with that. I eventually purchased some earplugs to reduce background noise in conversations, and I eventually started to kind of when I started to slowly increase my screen time, I would use blue light glasses and definitely reduced the brightness settings as much as possible. My next tip is kind of focused on mitigating the factors that you can do to promote healing. So research shown that reducing caffeine, alcohol, and other irritants may impact the brain's ability to recover. And more importantly, I think especially those particular factors can really impact sleep. Sleep is when our body rests, but our brain is actively working to consolidate memories, to reduce waste and heal those injured pathways within the brain. So I made it a point to get to sleep check early each night, which was really difficult, because I normally go to bed pretty late, but I'm also on my phone or watching TV. I go to sleep with listening to something. So I really tried to get a full 7 to 8 hours. I drank more water than usual, which as someone who hates water, that was a struggle. But I knew that it was so important to do. And then also I sought out brain boosting foods. So fish is packed with omega-3s that are really important. So whenever we did go out, I would get the fish option, or other types of, opportunities to have fish. Blueberries are packed with antioxidants. Turmeric is really good. Leafy greens, beans, or legumes. Flaxseed or chia seeds. So I put that in my oatmeal. because they don't really have any taste and they just sort of like come on in, but I knew that they were brain packed. And there's a lot more out there too. So I really encourage, those things. Maybe they serve no thing, but they can't hurt, that's for sure. Luckily, my workplace was really flexible as well, allowing me to work from home and to reduce additional stimulation and driving time that would cause a lot of cognitive demand. But I really had to evaluate what my work activities were, and really only working, an hour or two at a time to prevent overload. And I would just sort of like increase my work hours throughout the day or throughout the week, as long as I didn't have any symptoms. My next tip is try to move your body when you can manage it. It was about a week before I felt comfortable exercising because, when I was so dizzy the very first week, the last thing I felt comfortable doing was moving. Research actually shows that after a concussion, those individuals after a concussion are more vulnerable to additional head injury. So this is particularly scary because if you hit your head while you're still healing, the consequences can actually be catastrophic or even fatal. It's called sudden impact syndrome. So I knew that I wanted to get back to exercise, but I wanted to do it very safely. My typical exercise routine kind of like consists of like both like cardio and strength training, like 2 to 3 times a week. So I wanted to kind of get back to that. I didn't want to necessarily like completely change my workout exercise routine because again, I wanted to kind of get back to normal. So research also indicates that exercise elevates your heart rate and therefore your blood flow to your brain, promoting healing, the healing process. So, if you're not a typical exerciser, it still might be helpful to incorporate like daily walks, even just after a concussion, as long as you're not having symptoms, either before or during or after the exercise happens. So, I started with a walk around my apartment complex for, about 30 minutes. That was probably, as much as I can do, with no major symptoms. The next day I tried an exercise class, but I planned to scale like everything, every element. I just wanted to keep my body moving. And I wanted to be able to pay attention to what my body was telling me so that I could stop before any pain happened. So it was really important not to overdo it and not to risk any additional head injury. So anything, overhead or anything with like a ton of movement or potential, that I just wasn't about to do it. So this was another area where I had to be okay with kind of like doing something different from everyone else. This, exercise class, I kind of just had to know that I needed what I needed to do. And I worked with the instructor to make the necessary modifications, but I just sort of had to be like, this is my own exercise journey and I don't care what anybody else thinks. So, instead of a barbell, I would use a PVC pipe or just my body and just like move my arms. Running was scaled to walking. Squatting, any squatting was to like a box so that I would have the proper supports there. I didn't do any sort of throwing overhead or movement up and head. So like a wall ball or like a lot of like up and down motions, like a burpee. No, I knew I was like, so I would scale those to a box or make them a lot less the up and down motion to reduce the dizziness. So whatever exercise you're doing, be smart, be safe, and scale appropriately. Stretching and yoga are also some really great options for low stress body exercises. But it's really key to keep moving your body as long as you don't have like significant symptoms. My next tip is, listening to your body, talk with your doctor and keep track of your symptoms. I knew the red flags for a concussion and I was sure to make sure to like, look out for them. Right. So I was making sure that there wasn't like a worsening headache or vomiting or dizziness. I checked my pupils multiple times to make sure like one wasn't more dilated than the other. Any slurred or trouble with speech. All of these are red flags that would indicate maybe there's something that needs to be different there. I messaged my doctor the first night of symptoms. Luckily, I was able to kind of like email or send a message to the portal because I knew the importance of tracking your symptoms. I've seen so many people with a history of concussion, but there's like no record of it at all. So when it came to them accessing services or long-term supports because they expected this to be better and it isn't, it was a lot more challenging for them to get help. So I visited my doctors. So I sent the kind of symptom list to my doctor that night. And then I eventually was able to, he recommended I come in to see him. And so I went and visited my doctor's office in my sunglasses and my hat and my mask and lowered lights and whatnot. And he did eventually send me for a CT scan to make sure that there were no abnormalities, because he did express that this was a significant concussion. And so basically a CT scan that they're sending you for like kind of external changes within the brain, bleeding, swelling, those type of things, to make sure that there's not a larger issue at hand that doesn't compromise my overall medical stability. Mild traumatic brain injuries are basically classified into two different categories. There's complicated and there's uncomplicated. Uncomplicated, so I'll say, as with many concussions, my CT scan came back normal, meaning I had an uncomplicated mild traumatic brain injury. This is in the medical sense, because I would say it was very complicated what I had to go through, but that's just how they determine it. Complicated concussion means that you've had those kind of like brain abnormalities that occur, but majority of individuals do not experience that. So I think it's really hard because many people will go in, and because their brain scans are normal, even medical professionals say that, well, there's nothing wrong with you, you can leave. You'll get better in a few days, but it's not necessarily true. Just because the CT scan is really looking at that external types of changes, not necessarily how the brain is communicating with it itself or blood flow throughout the brain. So it's important to advocate for yourself as needed, even if your brain scans come back normal. I went through kind of the experience. What I did is I was kind of like tracking my percentage of activity or wellness so that I could kind of assess if I was doing better. And I wasn't like it was something that I was like necessarily like writing down, but I was just kind of like saying like, the first week I felt like I was just at a 25%. Like I definitely couldn't do what I was normally doing in a day. And then, the next week I went up to a 50%. And so like I could tell I was getting better. Like, again, the timing between the symptoms were getting better. And then, I was up into like a 75% after that. And then the last like week I was at a 90%. But I will say, so I was very lucky to be able to feel as well as I was like during the month time period. But, I was still like limiting my exercise, still slowly like increasing difficulty, increasing activity, mental demand. I was still proceeding with caution. So like even at a 90%, I was still like very cautious and still slowly building up. And that being said, expect some ups and downs and adjust your activity accordingly to make smart decisions. Just because that was like a long-term kind of progression, there were definitely some times where I would make a mistake, I would try too much, and I'd be down back at a 35%, not being able to be at 100. Like I said, this past week, I, overdid it, and I felt just like I was going back to some of those more difficult times. And it's been, months of, seemingly like 100% like normal activity, and still like got that kind of, wait, hold on, you're not invincible. And you still have to keep in mind that your brain is still processing information a little bit differently. So, there were times when I thought I was over it, I would go to work or did normal activity. I'm really bad at taking breaks normally. So I would just be like, oh, it's fine. I feel fine. So I'm just going to keep going. But by like midday or mid-afternoon, I would start to feel a little fuzzy in the eyes and I would need to go home. Later that night, the entire next day, headaches, they would not go away, super sensitivity to light and noise. And I felt like I really just had to start from scratch, really kind of breaking it down to 1 hour of work or limited screen time, no exercise, using my sleep or eye mask. I would kind of keep those at next to me all the time. I would keep it in my purse so that whenever I needed them, I would call it kind of like my concussion kit. And it basically had all of the things that I would need just kind of on hand. And I'll put a image up on our website too, where if you're dealing with these type of things, something that might help you as well is one of these concussion kits. But this experience was not one that I ever expected. Obviously, I'm a champion for preventing brain injuries, but you can't necessarily always protect against them. And it can happen to really anybody, even someone with all the knowledge about brain injury. It doesn't protect you from falls. It doesn't protect you from a brain injury. This whole experience has been filled with ups and downs, and I couldn't help but think how scary it must be and overwhelming it can be for individuals with less knowledge about brain injury and the recovery process. My doctor, as good as he is, explained concussions to me, but really recommended and he did recommend, no regular activity until like 5 days without symptoms. So I kept that in mind. And that's why I did scale my activity, but that was pretty much it. Like in terms of like what I do a day to day, there's really no roadmap to follow because everyone experiences it so differently. I was having to, throughout this process, I was struggling myself, but then I was also having to educate the people around me, friends, family, and having to guide my own treatment and do what I thought was best for myself based on the research and based on, what I knew about concussion. And I had to push through the fact that it might seem strange to other people, either what I was doing or how I looked or anything like that. So the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina is here to help any and all individuals that are impacted by brain injury. That means the people themselves, but also their families, their friends, their allies, their professionals or providers that help serve them throughout North Carolina and even nationwide. We just want to help people impacted by brain injury. So if you're in the thick of it, you're not sure what to do next, please reach out. We are here for you, whether it's through education, support, guidance to the services in your community, or advocating for change as a whole in North Carolina to help support those individuals impacted by brain injury. I really appreciate it if you've gotten this far for your time and your energy and talking with you today. I really wanted to share my story and my recent experience related to brain injury to hopefully help others. If you have a story that you want to tell related to concussion, mild traumatic brain injury, moderate, severe, non-traumatic brain injury, any acquired brain injury, please reach out to us. We'd love to be able to share your voice, share your story, and impact others as well, because we know that there's so many unique perspectives that can really tell a larger story about what brain injury is and how it can impact people. And there's a lot of people that still don't even really know what brain injury is, or they have one specific idea of brain injury in their mind, but there's so many other it's just such a wide range that you couldn't possibly put it into one small box. And each individual is so unique and so different, and what they bring to the table is different. People with brain injury can live full, happy, and fulfilling lives, whether they need extra supports or not. And so we want to help you do that. We want to help share that with others. And I hope that you guys will all walk a little bit safer this month, but then all 12 months of the year to prevent falls, to prevent traumatic brain injury. And thank you so much for your time.